Walls have evolved to become the primary spatial divider. They separate elements and create friction between the two zones created. Conscious placement of walls is very important in design and architecture. There are many things which are defined by walls, from public to private spaces to separating social classes and making communities. Walls in specifically designed space affect our emotion and perception of social constructs. Specifically, walls define spatial power. The 20th century invited a lot of critique pertaining to this dichotomy between walls, space, and power. Specifically, relationships between public and private were defined. This led to experimental ideas such as the panopticon, where a central power affects the outside atmosphere. Centrality and boundary were integral parts of this discourse. The wall finally emerged as something that both divides and connects. We believe that friction between public and private should be eliminated, along with any notion of centrality. The wall should be a decisive design move, but should not restrict other choices. We endorse the idea of a free plan, instead of a plan that is free from structural restrictions as outlined by Le Corbusier, but rather a plan where spaces are free from any sort of power relationship. Caldera, in her City of Walls, talks about how walls divide the poor and the rich. Everyday life comes down to dealing with private guards, gates, walls, and suspicion. There is a large disparity between public and private, public being the center of the city and private being the outskirts. The public is not allowed inside certain spaces because of their status. Private is portrayed as the be-all, end-all, something that must be cherished and money must be invested in order to protect. The public is seen as something that is negative and the source of many problems. The upper class wants to escape from the public. Caldera, however, does not address the fact that the city in turmoil is the city with no privacy. Carol Warren, a professor in ethnography, provides a different perspective. She explains how those who close off their home hide their private life while those who open it up allow for scrutiny, both developing stigma based on the rich. In a time where a rapidly changing society becomes unknown, pride, shame, and stigma become something the upper class wishes to hide, mainly their ethnicity, past, handicap, and sexuality. She points out that people require a complete sense of privacy, something that cannot be controlled by the public. Additionally, the centrality of the city and development of rich estates on the boundaries of the city creates this zone of wealth. One must pass through the outside in order to get to the center. Power is portrayed in this urban structure, not through visual and spatial control, but rather placement of wealthy individuals. The wall both divides and brings together. It divides the rich from the poor, but also brings together all of the rich. The rich form their own little community, simply described as mini-cities within a bigger city, the interior of which is public only to some and private to others. Simply put, exclusivity. The Syracuse University campus has an invisible wall which does exactly this. It brings together everyone on the inside and creates a certain sense of community. Everyone outside and not included in this group cannot be brought inside, and reinforces this idea of exclusivity. There is a specific atmosphere of the campus and an atmosphere of the outside. It is almost as though the private as an escape from the public. Power of the boundaries of cities prevents those on the inside from moving outside of a power bubble. This idea of wall worsens interclass relations but also creates a sense of community. The panopticon, on the other hand, offers a completely different and opposite perspective. Michel Foucault, French philosopher and social theorist, theorizes the relationship between power and knowledge and how they are used as a form of social control through societal institutions. In his book, Discipline and Punish, Foucault uses his notorious interpretation of panopticism based on the panopticon. The concept of the design is to allow all inmates of an institution to be observed by a single watchman, without the inmates being able to tell whether or not they are being watched. With its centralized form, the watchtower allows the guard to examine everything. Although it is physically impossible for the single watchman to observe all cells at once, the fact that the inmates cannot know when they are being watched means that all inmates must act as though they are watched at all times, effectively controlling their own behavior constantly. Foucault states, "He who is subject to a field of visibility and who knows it, assumes responsibility for the constraints of power. He makes them play spontaneously upon himself. He inscribes in himself the power relation in which he simultaneously plays both roles. He becomes the principle of his own subjugation." The role of panopticon is to strengthen the social forces, decrease regulatory spending, and strategically enforce power through mental, emotional, and physical barriers. Being applied to modern times, panopticism can be seen in various buildings and communities. Whether it be school, workplace, home, or jail, almost all people spend a majority of their lives in a space that is created by social hierarchy and surveillance. The Presidio model prison built in 2005 in Cuba incorporates a central to a circular building that is divided into cells, each cell extending the entire thickness of the building to allow inner and outer windows. The occupants of the cells are thus isolated from one another by thick walls, yet scrutinized from within and outside. Unfortunately, this idea of capitalist reign over surveillance led to more bad than good as time went on. In an article from the Geometric Review, Jerome E. Dobson and Peter F. Fisher show how geosurveillance has increased dramatically in recent years due to its decreased cost and accessibility. Vigilance no longer pertains solely to criminals and was extended to the common man. This in turn affected the way we build, move, and communicate within society. This leads to the conclusion that panopticism, although successful for those in power, can be harmful to the individual since private has complete control over the public. Absolute power in the middle takes autonomy from the outside, and in the example of the panopticon, the use of wall destroys community. In Figures, Doors, and Passages, Robin Evans looks at the portrayal of human figures and the houseplants as a representation of the way of life, and compares them to come to a better understanding of the spatial organization and social arrangements. He discusses how changes in the concepts of convenience and comfort can be reflected in the elements of an architectural plan, such as walls, doors, windows, and stairs, which are used to divide and then to reunite inhabited space. The Villa Madama, which was designed by Raphael's principles, homogenizes interior and exterior spaces in such a way that there is no distinction between the way through the house and occupied part of the house. Alberti once said, "It is also convenient to place doors in such a manner that they may lead us to many parts of the edifice as possible. Often paths would intersect and cause incidental encounters between people. Passages go across the entire house on each floor, connected with backstairs and grand open stairs. It forms a network of circulation. The use of passages divides the house into two domains, the inner inhabited rooms and the unoccupied circulation space." Evan thinks that arrangement and composition of space to create social space is important. He suggests that design is made specifically to ensure the public does not intersect or interrupt private spaces. In contrast to this, in Elizabeth Platter Zibberg's book, prominent architects discuss a problem where the private space that serves as independent from public function is truly separate. The public space is a problem in this day and age because people think it's impossible to maintain adequately, such as keeping it clean and safe. She suggests that public and private can never be separate due to the constant maintenance need of a public space. Evans suggests that public and private are separate but do not intrude on each other. Power is on the outside. People can leave the private anytime, and no stigma is created on the public inside. There is no existence of a power bubble. Walls invite idea of community and interaction. This interaction, however, is not mandatory. Our solution to these problems is simple. We believe that friction between public and private should be eliminated along with any notion of centrality. As architects, the relation between public and private should be completely based on the client, however they want these to intersect, from forced interaction to chosen interaction. It is only good if the public is next to the private, with public circulation aimed towards the outside. This prevents any sort of power bubble. The private area should be on one side while the public should be on the other. The wall should be a decisive design move, but should not restrict other choices. We endorse the idea of a free plan, instead of a plan that is free from structural restrictions as outlined by Le Corbusier, but rather a plan where spaces are free from any sort of power relationship. We believe that any form of centrality is bad. It creates an awkward and forced relationship between the two. Both should be open to the outside. We agree with Evans on the idea of the wall. It should invite community, but interaction should not be mandatory. Conscious placement of walls is very important in design and architecture. There are many things which are defined by walls, from public to private spaces, to separating social classes and making communities. Walls and specifically designed space affect our emotion and perception of social contrast. Specifically, walls define spatial power.